Every time I drag and drop a numerical field to the values area of a pivot table, it always defaults to sum, yet sometimes I want some other aggregate calculations like the maximum, the minimum, the average, or even the count. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Here I have a pivot table. I've already dragged the region field to the rows area. When I come to malaria tested, then drag and drop it to the values area, drop. You can see it's saying sum of malaria tested. That means by default, it's summing up the numbers. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to change the calculation to any other calculation of your choice. Remember, the pivot table doesn't just display numbers, but it does calculations. Let's switch on to Excel and we dive deeper into the main point of this video. What I'm going to do first, I'm going to create a pivot table. So with one cell within my dataset selected, I'm going to go to the Insert tab. Here is the pivot table, or I can use the keyboard shortcut Alt+NVT. It will bring for me this dialog box. I'm going to create the pivot table on a new worksheet. So I'm going to select New Worksheet, and then I'm going to click OK. This will create for me a pivot table. The first step is to rename our pivot table. So I'm going to go to the Pivot Table Analyze tab. Then from the Pivot Table group, I'm going to come to Pivot Table Name. And when I click on this Pivot Table Name 5, I want to rename it to Malaria Report 81. And when I hit Enter, that one is now the name of my pivot table. I'm also going to come down here to the worksheet, double click sheet 4, and then change it to Malaria 81, and then hit Enter. Now I'm going to go to the field list and then drag the nurse field and drop it to the rows area, drop. And then I'm going back to the field list, drag malaria tested and drop it to the values area. Now because these are numerical values or number values, it will automatically default to sum. So when I drop it, you can see it saying sum of malaria tested. Let me first drag my field list this side here. I'm going to drag malaria tested 2 more times to the values area. So I'm going to come to malaria tested again and then drag it the second time to the values area, drop, and then I'm going to go back to the field list, drag malaria tested again the third time and drop it to the values area. Let me first close the field list, close. You can see the way it's naming our field names. The first one is sum of malaria tested. The second one is sum of malaria tested 2. And then the third field name is sum of malaria tested 3. But those are not good names. I'm going to rename all of them. So I'm going to come to the first one, click. I'm going to call it in charge, and then tab. Here I'm going to change it to total malaria tested, and then tab. And then here I'm going to change it to maximum malaria tested, tab. And then here I'm going to change it to minimum malaria tested, enter. So that means on this field you're going to change it to maximum, then on this field we're going to change it to minimum. But before we do that, let's first do some number formatting. So I'm going to click on this cell, right click, come to number format, click, and then I'm going to go to number, and then here for decimal places I'm going to change it to 0 decimal places. Then I'm going to select use a thousand separator and then click OK. I'm going to do the same for this one, right click, number format, number, and then decimal places I'm going to change to 0, use a thousand separator checked, then click OK. Right click, come to number format, number, for decimal places I'm going to reduce it to 0, use a thousand separator, and then I'm going to click OK. Let's now see how we can change the calculations. The first field or the first column, we're going to leave it as sum of malaria tested. That one we are going to leave it the way it is. But the second field, we are going to change it to maximum. So I'm going to click on it. Now to change it, you need to right click. You have all these options here. But here, we have summarize values by. So when you hover over to summarize values by, at the side here, it gives you some aggregate functions, you can see we have the sum, the count, the average, the maximum, the minimum, and then product, and we have some more here. There are actually 11 in total, but all these are aggregate functions. That means you can do aggregate calculations using them. Now the first one here is by default for numbers. That's why you can see it's checked. There's this tick you are seeing at the left hand side of the function. So when you are seeing that tick, that means that particular function is selected. But if, for example, maybe you want the count, when you click on count, for example, let me click on count, automatically it will change my calculation to count, but that's actually not what we want. So I'm going to right click and then come back to summarize values by, and you can see now count is ticked, meaning count is actually the one that we are currently using. You can as well come to average if you want to get the average, but for our case what we want for that particular column or for that particular field is actually maximum. So when I come down here, there is maximum here, and when I click on it, this one is now showing me the maximum number of malaria tested in a single testing period by this particular in charges here. Let us also change the calculation for this one here. The third column, click to minimum. So when I right click, I'm going to come back to summarize values by, and then when I come here, this time around, I'm going to select minimum. So when I click on minimum, you can see it's now showing me the minimum number of malaria tested in a single testing period by these in charges here. Now, I've told you that there are actually 11 different aggregate calculations that you can use. Let's go and see others. So when I right click, when I come to summarize values by, this one that's on display, those are the most used aggregate calculations. But when you come down to more options, when I click on it, it will open for me the value field settings, as you can see, and the aggregate calculations, all of them, they are down here. But let me first close this. You can as well select your pivot table, the column or the field where you want to change the calculations. And when you come to the pivot table analyze tab, then from the active field, you can as well find field settings here. So when you click on field settings, it opens for you the same dialog box. Now, down here, these are all the aggregate functions that you can use. You can see them, they are here. So we have the sum, the count, the average, the max, the minimum, the product. But remember, there's also count numbers. Now we are going to see the difference between count numbers and the count which is on top here. But we also have standard deviation, and then the standard deviation for the population. This one is standard deviation for the sample, and then this one is standard deviation for the population. Then we also have variance for the sample, and then variance for the population. Those two statistical measures are actually very rarely used. But let me first close this dialog box. Now let me show you something. I'm going to first bring back my field list. Right click, come down to show field list, click. Now when I drag a text field, like for example, let me drag the nurse field and drop it to the values area. So when I drag a text field and drop it to the values area, drop, by default, because it's text not numbers, it defaults to count. Remember, numbers defaults to sum, but text defaults to count. Like you can see on top here, it's saying count of nurse. But when I come to the field and then I right click, and when I come to summarize values by, you can see on the options here, I'm having only the count which is not grayed out. The rest of the functions are actually grayed out. The reason is because the only calculation that you can do on text values is the count. So let me first click outside here. I'm actually going to remove that last field, the count of nurses. Let me click on it. Then I'm going to remove it. I don't want it there. I'm also going to close the field list, close. Now I'm going to click on my pivot table. I'm going to go to the design tab, and then from the pivot table style, I'm going to click on this. I'm going to apply the custom style that we created last video. So it's this one here. When I click on it, this is how it looks. If you didn't watch that video and you don't know how to create custom pivot table styles, I'm going to leave that video at the end of this video. and also the link to that video on the description of this video. Now finally, let me show you the difference between count and count numbers. So I'm going to come to malaria in pregnancy sheet, click on it. I have this small data set which is showing malaria in pregnancy. It's recorded from January to December. That means this column is having 12 records. But I want you to remember in July, they have recorded not available. And then in October, they have left the cell blank. So the difference between count and then count numbers is this. For the case of count, it counts non-empty cells. That means it includes both numbers and text. But for the case of count numbers, it only counts numerical numbers. So it doesn't count text and empty cells, it only counts numbers. Now to help us demonstrate that, I'm going to quickly insert a pivot table. So with one cell within my dataset selected, I'm going to go to the Insert tab, click on Pivot Table. This time around, I'm going to put it in this existing worksheet. So select Existing Worksheet. And then for location, I'm going to put it in E4. So when I click OK, this is my pivot table. I'm going to drag only one field. And the field I'm going to drag is actually the malaria in pregnancy. So when I drag it, remember it's having a mixture of numbers, text, and empty cells. So when I drop it there, you can see it has defaulted to count. That's because of this text here. That's why it's saying count of malaria in pregnancy is 11. That means it's counting all the 10 numbers and also including the text. So for count, it actually counts the non-empty cells. So I'm going to first of all close the field list, close. Now when I come here and right click, when I come to summarize values by, you can see the count is checked. That means it is this count that was used to count those numbers. But when I come to more options, click. This time around, I'm going to change it to count numbers. Click on this count numbers. Remember, this count numbers only counts numerical numbers. So when I click OK, it's now counting 10. That means it's excluding this text and also this empty cell. So it's only counting numerical numbers. So that's the difference between count and then count numbers. Yeah, that is it for this particular video. If you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe. This is a video where we talked about how to create custom pivot table styles. You can click on it, then you go and watch it. Until next video, then we meet again. Thank you.